I'm Laurie Cardoza-Moore, and this is Focus on Israel. Today, there exists a little-known global network of non-government agencies called NGOs that are leading the world in an effort to delegitimize and destroy Israel. In 2002, a new research institute, NGO Monitor, was founded to expose and fight against this unholy coalition of anti-Semitic, anti-Israel organizations. It is truly a David versus Goliath struggle. Hello. And thank you for joining me today on Focus on Israel. Like most Americans, I began to ask a lot of questions about what happened to our country following 9/11. As I read and talked to experts, the issues of radical Islam and the attacks on America and Israel became extremely personal to me. I realized that Israel is facing threats from nearly every corner, from Iran's nuclear weapons program, from terrorist groups such as Hamas, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, and ISIS. I also saw how much of the world comes against the Jewish state. The UN and the world continue to demand the creation of a Palestinian state, a terrorist state on Israel's doorstep. Now we see a rise of global anti-Semitism with threats from every corner, as it seems we're heading closer to the biblical prophecy of Armageddon in the Middle East. So if you're a Christian, why should you care? Many Christians believe that as the Jews rejected Jesus, then God has rejected them. This replacement theology is growing, as many Christians believe they have replaced the Jews in God's prophetic plan. If you truly believe that the Bible is the Word of God, then you know that when He speaks of Israel, He is speaking about the land of Israel and the Jewish people, not the church. The mission of this series and PJTN is to educate and equip you so that you can share this truth with your family and friends. And on our program today, you'll learn a wealth of information. Before I served as a special envoy to the UN on human rights issues for the World Council of Independent Christian Churches, I knew very little about the groups called NGOs, many of which have great influence in the halls of the United Nations and other international bodies. So while in Israel, I took the opportunity to interview Yitzhak Santos. At the time, he was serving as Chief Programs Officer for NGO Monitor. Yitzhak made Aliyah in 2011 from the San Francisco area, where he was Middle East Affairs Director at the Jewish Community Relations Council. Founded in 2002, NGO Monitor is a globally recognized research institute promoting democratic values and good governance, primarily in the context of the Arab-Israeli conflict. NGO Monitor publishes fact-based research and independent analysis about non-governmental organizations, including information on their funders and stakeholders. Since 2013, it is a recognized organization in special consultative status with the UN Economic and Social Council. The boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement is the main component of the strategy of dozens of NGOs at the UN to delegitimize Israel as an apartheid regime through the international isolation. Utilizing lawfare, NGOs seek arrest warrants against Israeli officials for anti-terror operations, file lawsuits against companies and governments doing business with Israel, lobby for cases against Israelis at the International Criminal Court, and delegitimize the Israeli Supreme Court. Lawfare is essentially the exploitation of courts and international legal bodies to judicially impose boycotts and embargoes and interfere with Israel's diplomatic and foreign relations. NGOs utilize international legal rhetoric in their campaigns to add a veneer of credibility and expertise to their political objectives. They routinely distort existing international law and push to invent new standards in order to portray Israel as an illegal aggressor and guilty of war crimes. Mr. Santis explained to me how many of these nefarious groups work behind the scenes to undermine both Israel, the Jewish people, and Christianity itself. He also told me how NGO Monitor is pushing back against and exposing these groups for what they are.
Yeah, NGO Monitor began a little over 10 years ago. It was started by Professor Gerald Steinberg, who is a professor of political science at Bar Ilan University here in Israel. He took notice of what was happening at the Durban Anti-Racism Conference in 2001. There were two conferences. One was the governmental and one was the non-governmental organization forum, or the NGO forum. The NGO forum had several thousand NGOs that were present, and they passed a resolution calling essentially for a global isolation of Israel, meaning to isolate Israel completely, militarily, economically, diplomatically, culturally, in every possible way to isolate Israel. The language that was used to describe Israel was a language of demonization and the language of delegitimization, to remove the legitimacy of the state of Israel, making Israel to be equivalent to apartheid and to be equivalent to even Nazi Germany. We hear that in the propaganda quite a bit. The whole purpose is, just as Nazi Germany and just as apartheid South Africa were illegitimate entities and should not have existed because of their racism and oppression. So by repeating over and over and over and over again the lie that Israel is an apartheid state, that Israel is a racist state, and so on, they create this echo chamber and create this image of Israel being non-legitimate and should cease to exist. That is the goal. That is ultimately the goal of this effort. So NGO Monitor was started because the network that is pushing this agenda, it's a global network of non-governmental organizations that are leading this effort. And one of the things that we are not only studying and reporting and taking action against is that many of these NGOs, many of these NGOs, receive funding, in many cases the bulk of their funding, from governments. So these non-governmental organizations are receiving millions and millions of euros from governments. And it's mostly European governments, of course. It's complex. It's very complex. And let's just take the Presbyterian Church as one example. So the Presbyterian Church has a long history of involvement in this region. The Presbyterian Church sent missionaries to the Middle East in the 19th century. And there are a lot of institutions here in the region which are Presbyterian connected. The American University in Beirut, the American University in Cairo, and so on. So there's a very strong Presbyterian presence in this region. Other Protestant denominations, similarly, the mainline denominations, have these kinds of connections to the region. And the early years of Israel's existence, one of the complaints that Israelis had was that the State Department itself was anti-Israel. The State Department opposed President Truman recognizing the newly found state. And that was because there was a group of Arabists in the State Department, and most, if not all of them, had been the children of these missionaries who spoke Arabic, and they were very familiar with the region, and so they were put in charge of the region, and they had a natural affinity for the Arab side of the conflict. So a lot of these mainline churches have these roots within the region. Then there's a Palestinian Christian community. It's mostly Greek Orthodox or Roman Catholic and so on, but at the same time, the Palestinian Christian community many have bought into or are part of the Palestinian national movement. Now, there's a gentleman by the name of Na'im who leads an organization called Sabil. He founded the organization in the late 80s, early 90s. Sabil promotes something called Palestinian liberation theology. And what Na'im did was very clever and very, very, very brilliant. And as far as I'm concerned, it was a brilliant stroke. And that was to marry Palestinian nationalism to Christian theology and calling it Palestinian liberation theology. Now, liberation theology is very popular. It's very trendy within a number of seminaries, mainline seminaries. Of course, it began in Latin America and is more familiar to Catholics and Protestants. So Pope John Paul banned involvement of Catholic clergy in political movements because, well, he came from a communist country, and liberation theology was more closely akin to communism than to Catholicism, and so there was a backlash by the church against that. Liberation theology has since taken a popular turn in a lot of Protestant mainline seminaries, Presbyterians, Episcopalian, the UCC, and so forth. And so what Na'im did was he married Palestinian nationalist ideology to Christian liberation theology, and now, many years later, he's been very successful in essentially bringing the gospel of Palestinian liberation theology to a lot of mainline churches. Just as Na'im was able to bring Palestinian nationalist ideology into mainline Protestant churches, Sami Awad of the Bethlehem Bible College, who's also the founder of the Holy Land Foundation, was able to take a similar concept and wrap a evangelical theological base around it, which also coincided with a newer generation of evangelical Christians who are rebelling to some degree against their parents' form of faith and belief, and are pushing for a more social justice, social action kind of agenda. And what's happening is that the Christ of the Checkpoint, which is a manifestation of the Bethlehem Bible College, they're latching onto that generation, onto those ideas, and are once again they're sugarcoating Palestinian nationalism, wrapping it into a theological coating, and injecting it into the evangelical churches, and the younger generations are beginning to eat these pills and are now taking on Palestinian nationalist ideology. So we're beginning to hear in evangelical circles now demonization of Israel. A lot of Catholic charities, especially the Caritas Network, are giving, I think we estimated about $10 million to all these different NGOs, and it's all laid out in that report. And so on the one hand, you have Pope Francis I comes over to Israel about a year ago, and very clearly lays out a support for two states, for two peoples, goes to Herzl's tomb and lays a wreath there, which is the Vatican's recognition of the validity of Zionism and of the right of the Jewish people to national self-determination. He went to Ramallah to validate Palestinian rights, okay, and then invites President Shimon Peres and President Abbas to the Vatican to pray for peace. So that's a two-state solution concept. And then at the same time, there are Catholic charities giving money to all these NGOs that oppose a two-state solution, oppose normalization with Israel, and oppose peace with Israel. And so in what we're seeing here, it's a very similar kind of dynamic when you have the governments, whether it's the UK or Belgium or France or whatever, supporting two states for two peoples, oppose BDS, oppose terrorism, and support reconciliation. Yet you have different segments of the government funneling off money going to these NGOs, which support exactly the opposite agenda, okay, and actually promote conflict. So that's all in there, and that's one of the reasons we exist, or that's the key reason that we exist. So to highlight all this and to try to stop it.
I want to take you to Israel in pictures and film. I want you to see how God's sovereign hand can be seen before our eyes right here in this land. That's why PJTN is offering a special anniversary package that includes a captivating new book and award-winning DVD. Israel Rising is a unique visual story of Israel's miraculous journey from unforgiving desert to thriving nation. Thousands of years ago, the prophet Ezekiel foretold a future time in which the arid land of Israel would come alive for its people. Now this breathtaking book documents the fulfillment of this vision, as rarely seen photographs from the 1880s to the 1940s are juxtaposed with recent photos of the same locations. This book will inspire and captivate you as it illuminates Israel's foretold awakening in a new and unforgettable way. In addition, you'll receive the award-winning documentary, Israel Indivisible: The Case for the Ancient Homeland. This inspiring film examines the many political twists and turns that make Israel the world's most controversial nation. From Abraham and the Promise to the issues facing the Jewish state today, the film examines the historical, archaeological, legal, and biblical foundations for the modern state of Israel. This is a limited time offer for these two remarkable resources for just a one-time gift of $70 today. Your generous donation will help ensure that PJTN stays on the front lines and in the headlines of all the important issues facing Israel and our Jewish brethren. So please go to pjtn.org today. From studying history, it's very clear that what starts with the Jews never ends only with the Jews. We must strongly stand against any anti-Semitic trends, for if not stopped, they'll cause harm to all of us, and we'll witness the downfall of our Judeo-Christian Western culture. Today, many people say there's no longer a need for a Jewish state, that Jews around the world no longer need a place of refuge. But anyone who has heard recent statistics about the worldwide rise in anti-Semitism would never make such a claim. The reality is that neo-Nazi groups and Nazi sympathizers are increasing around the world. Surveys show that over 1 billion people in the world harbor anti-Semitic attitudes. Close to 50% believe that Jews have too much power in the business world, and 2/3 of the world's population has never heard of the Holocaust or believe the historic accounts of it are inaccurate. Don't let yourself be manipulated by evil people with a wicked agenda. When the self-serving villains are in control, good people from all religions suffer. Muslims, Christians, and all people of conscience should stand proudly and show respect for a country that gives so much to the world in so many ways. Do your part, do your research, and do what you can to make a difference. Because what happens in Israel does affect us all. This is not just a Jewish or just an Israeli problem. This is a problem for all humanity, for each and every one of us who believe in freedom and human rights. Learn more about what you can do at pjtn.org. Coming up next, we'll hear more from Yitzhak Santos as he explains two of the greatest travesties of Christianity: liberation theology and the supposed peace conference called Christ at the Checkpoint. Christ at the Checkpoint is not about peacemaking. It's about actually promoting demonization against Israel. Mr. Santos reveals how Naim Atik, a Palestinian priest, married Palestinian nationalism to liberation theology to create Palestinian liberation theology. This heretical theology has been injected into mainline Protestant churches worldwide and led to the creation of Christ at the Checkpoint at the Bible Bethlehem College in Israel.
So Christ at the Checkpoint, in its promotions, talks about wanting to dialogue with both peoples, okay? And so they invite Palestinian Christians, and the only Israeli Jews that they invite are Israeli Jewish believers in Jesus. 99.9% of Israeli Jews are not Christians. And so when they're having a dialogue, they're having a dialogue within a very tight echo chamber. And they're cutting out Israelis from the dialogue, from the discussion, okay? So it's intellectually dishonest to say that they're having a dialogue with Israelis. They are not. So Christ at the Checkpoint is not about peacemaking. It's about actually promoting demonization against Israel. Yeah, I mean, the message that is given at Christ at the Checkpoint, it's very similar in some ways to the message that Sabeel gives, but it's more tuned to an evangelical audience. The message, first of all, at the theological level, there's an effort to revive replacement theology, to describe Jews as having lost favor with God because after the destruction of the temple, there was a punishment for not believing in Jesus, and therefore any national rights that Jews may have had in the land of Israel or the land of Judea were forfeited. Okay, and that's a major part of classic Christian teachings. You know, after World War II, a lot of Christian theologians began to look at the teachings within their faith regarding Jews and Judaism, and found that there was what they called a teaching of contempt towards Jews and Judaism that in many ways, you know, fed into a lot of hate that led ultimately to the Holocaust. What's going on here is that, look, the Palestinian national movement has a national agenda, and that agenda is to deny the right of the Jewish people to any part of Palestine, to deny the right of the Jewish people to any national sovereignty in any part of this country. Now, once you start injecting theology into that kind of conflict, you're adding to the hatred, you're adding to the bigotry, and you're not making peace. You're not looking to find common ground with the Jewish people. What you're trying to do is deny them, trying to dehumanize them. And that is something which I think Christ at the Checkpoint has been doing. There have been speakers there who have talked about how Israeli Jews, who are half of Israeli Jews, are Ashkenazi, from European descent. Well, they're not really Semites, they're actually Khazars, okay, and therefore they have no right to live here. Well, my God, when I hear that argument, a racial definition of Jews, where have we heard that before? Okay, and now we have Palestinian Christians who are pushing that agenda, and there are now some American Christians who are echoing that and racializing Jews, just like the Nazis did. And this whole idea that Jews are not Semites and don't deserve to live here, well, I would just ask the question, excuse me, we were Semitic enough to be murdered by the millions, and now we're not Semitic enough to live in the Middle East? Pardon me, but that is racism. There's very little difference between that argument and the Nazi argument. It is an anti-Semitic argument. It is thoroughly anti-Semitic. And it's also not true on top of it all. We did a report last year, it's on our website, which highlighted the role that anti-Semitism played in the divestment campaign within the Presbyterian Church. We had access to their Facebook page, a closed Facebook page, in which they were talking among themselves. And they thought they were talking among themselves. And so they let loose. So they weren't careful about what they were saying. They weren't on camera. They weren't being quoted by a reporter. They weren't issuing press releases. They were talking among themselves. And the things that were being said by this Presbyterian group, or members of this group, would make, I don't know, David Duke or Adolf Hitler very comfortable. The Jews control the media, the Jews control the government, the Zionists are trying to take over the world. They were praising Press TV, which is the Iranian-owned press company, because Iran is the only country in the world that is Zionist-free. I mean, that's an exact quote, and you can download the report from our website. We published all this material. We sent it to the Presbyterian Church, to their church leaders in Kentucky. Got no response. No response whatsoever. They buttoned up their lips. They circled the wagons and said nothing about this very horrific bigotry. The IPMN, the Israel-Palestine Mission Network, is still able to use the Presbyterian Church's nonprofit status to raise funds for its efforts. But anti-Semitism gets a pass. And unfortunately, that's the reality in today's world, is anti-Semitism gets a pass in many different circles. And look, you know, the reason why Israel came into existence was because of anti-Semitism. And anti-Semitism didn't go away. It may have gone underground for a while, but certainly what we're seeing in Europe is absolutely horrific. And that's why we have Israel. That's why we have Israel. So that the anti-Semites can fume and scream all they want, but there's something called the Israeli Defense Forces that they're going to have to get by if they ever want to put their agenda back into power. Otherwise, you know, we're not going there again. No more ghettos, no more gas chambers, no more being a scattered minority everywhere, vulnerable to everything. We defend ourselves now. And if you don't like the fact that Jews defend themselves, then I'm sorry, I have no apologies for that.
Presently, Mr. Santis is a senior writer and analyst at Stand With Us, as well as a freelance writer for the Times of Israel and several other publications. I want to thank him for giving us his time and his valuable knowledge. Well, that's our program for today, and I want you to know we appreciate your support. The time to take a stand is now. Be a leader in your community and in your church. One person can make a difference. Get involved with and support pro-Israel organizations such as PJTN. Call your senators, congressmen. Let your elected leaders hear from you. Visit our website to learn more. Sign up to receive action alerts and order our films to share with family and friends. Please encourage everyone you know to tune in and become informed. God bless you, and thank you for all you do on behalf of our Jewish brethren and all Israel. We'll see you next time on Focus on Israel.
To support this program, send your tax-deductible gift to Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, P.O. Box 682711, Franklin, Tennessee 37068. You can also support PJTN online. Visit pjtn.org or call 1-877-873-9020.
Anti-Semitism has reached epic proportions, and Israel is now surrounded by nations who seek its destruction. For Israel to lose just one battle would mean losing everything. As Christians, it is our biblical responsibility to stand with our Jewish brethren and Israel. PJTN needs your help to reach more Christians with this urgent message. Please visit our website to become a member today and order our award-winning documentaries. You must decide that you won't be silent. Sign up now at pjtn.org. God bless you, and thank you for your support and prayers.